American English, American English, American English webinar series. Teach and learn. American English webinar series.
Welcome everyone to American English Webinar Series 4, brought to you by the United States Department of State from Washington, D.C. My name is Moderator Katie. I'm part of the American English team here in Washington, D.C., and we're so excited to see so many folks here today. Let's begin with a look at this great photo submitted by Kristen Bless featuring teachers gathered at the American Corner in Tirana, Albania, viewing the first session, Webinar 4.1. We love to see teachers learning together, and we hope all your viewing groups out there will share your webinar photos with us by emailing them to americanenglishwebinars@elprograms.org. We may feature them in the next webinar. My name is Moderator Katie, part of the American English team, as I said before, and we have Moderator Heather actually in the chat box to help you as well. We will both be assisting you to support you as you participate. Here you can see the exciting schedule for this series. Our next webinar, From Idea to Essay, Effective Strategies for Teaching Academic Writing by John Katranowski, will be in 2 weeks on October 5th. Our webinars are each 60 minutes long. Webinars are often related to a theme found on the American English website. The Teachers Corner section from the website shown here features resources and lesson ideas related to this month's topic. The theme for September is Teaching Young Learners. The Teachers Corner materials can be accessed in 2 ways, from the rotating feature bar at the top of the American English homepage, or through the English Teaching Resources section at the bottom center of the page. Next, let's look at how you'll participate in the webinars. During these webinars, you will hear but not see the presenter. The way for you to participate is by typing in the chat box, as many of you are already doing. The chat box is where you can ask questions or make comments related to today's topic. We may not be able to answer every question during the session, as there are often hundreds of teachers participating. However, there is another place to ask questions after the session is over, which is called our Ning, and we will take a look at that in just a moment. The presenter may also ask you questions in the form of polls. These multiple choice questions will appear on the screen for you to answer. Some people may experience technical problems during the webinar. We will let you know if we are having a global problem, but if you do lose sound, you can follow along with the caption pod at the bottom of the screen if refreshing your internet browser doesn't correct the problem. Each webinar series consists of 6 webinars. During the series, webinars take place every other Wednesday. Participants who attend at least 4 out of 6 webinars receive an e-certificate from the Regional English Language Office or local U.S. Embassy after the series ends. To ensure that you're eligible for the e-certificate, we will ask you to submit your attendance at the very end of the webinar. At the end of the webinar, you will click on a link that we provide and fill out the requested information. We hope that many of you are already familiar with our Ning site, but if you haven't registered yet, please do join this dynamic online community for EFL teachers. It may take up to 72 hours for your Ning registration to be approved, especially at the beginning of a new series. Here you can find resources and discussion questions related to each webinar, as well as all of the webinar recordings and featured materials. The Ning is also where you can ask presenter questions after the webinar and live chat with fellow community members. Raise your hand if you have read English Teaching Forum. All right, I see some hands going up. Awesome. It's a fantastic resource for English language teachers, and our current issue is now available on the American English website. You can also learn more about all of the features that Forum has to offer by watching a short video that's just been posted on our American English YouTube channel. And now for today's webinar, Strategies for Engaging Young Learners. In this webinar, we will discuss tips and strategies to engage young learners in the English language classroom. Young learners have different needs based on age and developmental stages. Young students also need to feel involved and connected to what they're learning. During today's webinar, we will learn about the different developmental characteristics of young learners, as well as several practical strategies to encourage students' creativity, incorporate visuals, and increase interaction. It's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Lauren Whitaker. Lauren recently returned from a 10-month English language fellowship in Astana, Kazakhstan, where she taught at Eurasian National University. She obtained her master's in linguistic studies with a concentration in language, culture, and society from Syracuse University in May 2015. She also taught at Syracuse University's English Language Institute with a focus on accuracy and American culture. Additionally, she volunteered with the City of Syracuse in a variety of refugee resettlement initiatives focusing on English language and cultural support. Lauren's diverse teaching experience has allowed her to develop a unique and ever-changing approach to English language teaching. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you for that introduction, Kate. Hello, everyone. Welcome to American English Webinar 4.2, Strategies for Engaging Young Learners. I'm Lauren, and I'm so happy to have all of you joining me today for this webinar. I really enjoyed reading through all of your really great responses on the pre-webinar discussion on the Ning, and I'm sure that this is going to be a great webinar. Before we get started, let's take a look at the pre-webinar polls. It looks like for the first question, do you have trouble keeping your students engaged during lessons? About 75% of you answered yes. This is great because keeping our students engaged is really important, but with young learners, maintaining that engagement can be tough. So it's okay and it's perfectly normal to have some trouble with that, and that's exactly why we are here today. For the other 25%, I really look forward to hearing from you with some advice and feedback in the chat box throughout the webinar. For the second question, the young learner classroom should be, it looks like an even mix, but with most of you, 85%, answering all of the above. And that's perfect because we do want our classrooms to be active, challenging, supportive, fun, and interactive. So today we're going to look at some strategies for making all of those things happen. And the last poll, visuals, hands-on activities, and a strong community help young learners learn. Looks like 100% of you agreed, and that's perfect. That's really great news. So I'm really looking forward to discussing some strategies with you today. To start things off, I'd like to know how many of you work with young learners. Can you please raise your hand if you do work with young learners? All right, lots and lots of hands are going up, and that's great. It looks like a lot of you are working with young learners. I hope today's webinar will prove helpful for you, and I look forward to hearing from so many experts in the chat box. Speaking of the chat box, I'd like to hear from you now. How are young learners different from secondary or older learners? Please type your answers in the chat box. Great, I see a lot of answers. Their behavior, attention seeking. They're more interested in English. That's interesting. More motivated, more uninhibited is a really great answer. So these are all really wonderful answers. So now that I've learned a little about you and your experience, let's move on to the goals of today's webinar. Today we will gain a better understanding of the young learner, or YL, describe 4 strategies designed to engage and challenge young learners, and provide examples for implementing or using these strategies in the classroom. Let's gain a better understanding of young learners by first exploring the cognitive developmental stages of young learners. Have you heard of Jean Piaget? Go ahead and raise your hand if you have. All right, there's a lot of hands going up, and that's great. Okay, because we are going to talk about him now. A long time ago, it was believed that children thought much the same way as adults. However, Piaget claimed that children actually reason quite differently, and in fact, they actively create their understanding of the world as they grow, not just physically, but mentally as well. He believed that this happens in 4 different developmental stages, and each stage represents the child's understanding of reality during that period of time. First, we have the sensory motor stage, in which children from ages 0 to 2 make sense of the world through movement and their senses. So, sight, smell, taste, hearing, and touch. And this is why babies are always touching things and putting them in their mouths. They're exploring the world through their senses. Next, we have the pre-operational stage. And this occurs from age 2 to about 7 years old. In this stage, thought processes begin to develop. As language development occurs, they learn that words symbolize or represent objects. This stage is marked with the development of imagination and memory. Children are able to represent objects mentally, and they start to develop and engage in pretend play. In other words, they begin to understand abstract concepts. Children in this stage are still egocentric, which means that they are still not quite able to accept the point of view of others. This is something to keep in mind when developing activities, because you will want to employ or use this trait to your advantage while also aiding in the development of less egocentric cognition. And we will talk about different ways to do that throughout the webinar. The third stage is the concrete operational stage. This occurs from about age 7 to 11 years old. In this stage, intelligence is increasingly demonstrated through logical and organized ways of relating to concrete objects and concepts. Children are able to begin to imagine different scenarios, meaning, what if something happens? This is because they now have more operational or rational and working thought. Lastly, children ages 12 and up enter the formal operational stage. At this stage, children reason more like adults. So with all of this information, we are able to understand that children are not able to reason in the same ways across all age categories. And because of this, instruction must be developmentally appropriate. I will be referring to these stages throughout the webinar, and will focus mostly on strategies for children or students 2 to 11 years old in the pre-operational or concrete operational stages. However, These strategies can be adapted for students in the formal operational stage too. Now, let's consider the characteristics of young learners and how they learn. Young learners, or YLs, can be defined as elementary school-aged students ranging from 5 to 12 years old. Many of you mentioned characteristics of young learners in the pre-webinar chat on the Ning, such as that they are very talkative and spontaneous, along with active and also easily distracted with an unending amount of energy. So, because of these characteristics, we understand that they need to have their imaginations, interests, and curiosities engaged in order to maintain their engagement throughout the lesson. In the chat box, please type the types of activities that you think would engage young learners. I'm seeing a lot of games and role plays, singing, visual activities, total physical response. Absolutely. Any activities that are going to allow students to be creative and to get moving with hands-on and active activities are going to be very, very engaging to young learners. So it's important to keep that in mind. I'm so glad to see that so many of you recognize that. So, in order to have an engaging classroom, the instruction needs to have certain things. We need to direct the endless and unpredictable energy of young learners towards enjoyable and educational learning experiences. We can accomplish this through remaining purposeful and creative with activities. It's important to engage young learners by providing meaningful opportunities for them to engage with the target language. It's also important to allow students opportunities to remain active and interact socially with their peers. Children learn by doing and experiencing. Therefore, young learners will benefit most from activities which are hands-on, and they also need opportunities to construct knowledge at their own individual pace by discovering and engaging in open-ended and well-supported activities that reflect all areas of their development. Lastly, it's important to find materials and themes that are of interest to them by using culturally relevant resources. The 4 strategies that we will look at will be building classroom community, challenging young learners by encouraging them to make choices and take risks, shaping individual learning, and providing structure through classroom routines. The strategies that we are focusing on in this webinar all center around goal-directed learning. Goal-directed learning allows opportunities for students to explore and experiment while encouraging new understandings. For goal-directed learning to be successful, the goal should be clear. There should be opportunities for students to experience their learning in different ways, making choices along the way. Activities and materials should be interesting and relevant based on their developmental stage and context, and the learning environment should be well supported by you, the teacher. It's important to incorporate these elements in every lesson and be sure that your students understand the goal and expectations of the lesson or activity. All right, so let's start with the first strategy. Raise your hand if you have tried community building activities in your classroom. Okay, I see a lot of hands are going up. That's great. It looks like a lot of you have made it a goal to create a strong classroom community, and I guess you could probably tell us why that's been beneficial in your classroom, and we're going to talk about that now. The process of learning a second language requires learners to be vulnerable in front of their peers. By creating a classroom culture of trust and support, learners are more likely to engage in the material, take necessary risks, and collaborate meaningfully with their peers. I'm sure those of you who have succeeded in creating a classroom community have noticed all of those benefits, so great job. Art can be a great way to bring a classroom of learners together and create a supportive and nurturing environment. It also allows students to be hands-on and use their imaginations. Creativity allows young learners to really engage with the material. This activity is a drawing version of show and tell, and it allows students to tell important details about their personal lives while also producing target language structures. By the end, the class should have a greater appreciation and understanding of their fellow classmates. The first step in this activity is to explain to students that they will be creating a self-portrait. Now, they might not know what a self-portrait is, so it's important that you explain what a self-portrait is and tell them that they should include personal facts such as their favorite food, hobbies, pets, clothing, family, activities, and the list could go on. Next, you will demonstrate the activity for the students. You should draw your self-portrait while discussing each detail of your process. Students will eventually talk about themselves to a partner and then introduce their partners to the class, so it's important that you model the language structures necessary to do that. Have these clearly posted for students to refer to if they forget. For example, my name is Lauren. Her name is Marta. In the fourth step, you will pair students with a partner. Students will use these correct target structures to introduce themselves to their partners, using their portraits for support. In the fifth step, partners will present each other to the group using the portraits as a visual aid, along with the information provided during their pair share. At the end of this activity, students and the class as a whole will have a better and more personal relationship based on these personal facts and interactions that they've just had. Now that we've explored creating a supportive classroom community, we can encourage our students to make choices and take risks. Young learners should be involved in purposeful and creative activities with other children. They should be encouraged to make major choices and construct knowledge at their own individual pace by discovering and engaging in open-ended activities that reflect their developmental stage. The next strategy we will explore provides these learning opportunities while dialoguing with a supportive adult. That would be you. Raise your hand if you frequently use visual images in your classroom. All right, lots of hands are going up. Great, that's great news. Next, we are going to look at a few different ways that you can use visual images to increase student engagement. So, next, let's go ahead and take a short poll. Okay, how do you use visual images? Do you use them to support text passages, elicit language use, support grammar and vocabulary instruction, encourage students to analyze and think critically? Okay, it looks like we have a pretty even mixture of ways that we use this, with eliciting language use in speaking, reading, listening, and writing in the lead. Okay, great. That's great. Thank you so much for taking that poll. In the pre-webinar reading, you read the How Many Words is a Picture Worth article by Lottie Baker. in which she explains that it can be tempting to focus our attention on the textual demands of instructional material, such as vocabulary and grammar, and sometimes only glancing at photos as they support those texts. But putting the focus on the image itself and letting that inspire the language production is incredibly beneficial too. Visual thinking strategies, or VTS, is a strategy in which the teacher leads the students in a discussion of a picture or photograph. VTS allows teachers to support students' language skills while developing a willingness and ability to present their own ideas, while respecting and learning from the ideas of their peers. Images have played a huge role in my classroom. I have found them really helpful as a support tool to aid in comprehension of unfamiliar words and concepts. In fact, images are more likely than words to remain in our long-term memory, so it's a very good tool to cause that memory production. The way we observe and understand pictures depends on our existing schema, meaning the memories and past experiences that each person has. So based on your past experiences will affect how you observe and understand pictures. So everyone sees something a little bit differently. Students will engage in meaningful interactions with their peers, causing them to explore different perspectives. Using images encourages students to push themselves to use more complex language structures in order to express their observations and opinions. Students create meaning through images by making individual choices. Images also bring life and realism to lessons. Photographs also hold the potential for language production across all 4 domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Davies said, "A human being can develop by seeing and at the same time having and integrating other sensory experiences. Children in the pre-operational and concrete operational stages are benefited greatly by developing the ability to relate what they see to other sensory experiences. As we said before, their ability to represent objects mentally, imagine what-if scenarios, and have the language necessary to describe what they see. Also, having the ability to imagine and memorize allows the images to serve a greater educational purpose in the classroom." What makes a photo engaging? In the chat box, please type what you think makes a photo interesting. Colors? Absolutely. A colorful picture is always very interesting. Actions and nature? Great. It has meaning. Authentic? These are all really great. Thought-provoking, that's a great one too. These are all really great answers. Thank you so much for answering all of these. The most memorable photos seem to have a little strangeness to them and include people and a sense of movement. Our brain is designed to notice movement, and for children in the pre-operational and concrete operational stages, viewing realistic images of concrete objects is more interesting than a photo of, say, a faraway landscape that they might not recognize. Raise your hand if you think this image meets our criteria for an interesting photo. Okay, some hands are going up. All right, yes, lots of hands have gone up. I agree. I think that this photo, based on the criteria, meets that of an engaging photo. We see movement. It includes people. It shows something interesting. Maybe children don't know exactly what's happening, so they have to discuss what they think is happening here. It contains a common object, or depending on where you're from, maybe it's not common, but this photo requires students to discuss and decide what is happening, so it's going to engage them. So where do we find these engaging photos? Some helpful resources include the New York Times Learning Network, What's Going On in This Picture section. Each week, a new photo is uploaded onto the website, and it's pulled from the news, and students from all over the world discuss what they think is going on in the picture. And then later in the week, they tell you what is going on. So they have lots of interesting pictures that you can use in your classrooms. Another fantastic resource is americanenglish.state.gov, which has plenty of resources for finding interesting and engaging photos. For example, Picture US, which is a collection of 26 full-color durable posters, which is great for those of you who said that color makes a photo engaging. Winter scenes, fall photos, summertime photos, and pictures for classroom activities are all series of photos with captions that you can pull from the website. Another great one is using your students' work. Allowing students to generate classroom materials saves you work and also allows for the students to engage in personally meaningful learning. And lastly, you can use local images from newspapers and magazines found in your region or country. In VTS, or Visual Thinking Strategies, discussions, teachers support student growth by guiding students either in pairs, groups, or as an entire class through a discussion about an image. Teachers are asked to use 3 open-ended questions. The questions are, what's going on in this picture? This is a good place to encourage students to share how the image makes them feel in order to personally engage them. The next question is, what do you see that makes you say that? This requires students to look a little bit deeper into the picture to provide evidence for their observations. The last one is, what more can you assume? So what more can they find to assume something that's not right there in the picture? And there are 3 ways that the teacher can facilitate the discussion. They can paraphrase or reword comments neutrally or without adding their own opinions. They can point at the areas that the students are discussing, and they can link and frame students' comments or tie student comments together in the discussion. So the steps for VTS discussions include asking the students to first look carefully at the image and talk about what they see. Next, they should explain their ideas with evidence found in the picture. They should form assumptions, lastly, about the things that are not seen in the photo. For example, what might happen next and why they think that? What happened before and why they think that, and etc. This allows them to practice with scenarios, or what if things happened, and explore abstract concepts. Lastly, they should listen to and consider the views of others and discuss the many possible perspectives, as this is an important aspect of language acquisition. Okay, so let's try this activity together. What do you see that is happening in this picture? Please type it in the chat box. A race, great. Competition, wonderful, yes. So we see that these people are in some type of competition. Fantastic, thank you. I noticed the same thing. In the next step, we need to provide support for our observation. So please type why you think it is a race or a competition or whatever you saw. Okay, great. We see action, so we see movement. We see a track, men in uniforms, clothing, numbers. These are all great support for your observations. In the next step, we ask students to form an assumption based on something that they cannot see, such as what will happen next, or what happened before the picture was taken. So in the chat box, please type what you think will happen next. Someone will win. Oh, we see 260 is going to win. That is also my assumption. Okay, and so you might ask students to explain why they think that, and they might say 260 is in the front. He looks the most serious. And there's a number of answers and things that can be discussed just based on this photo. And so this is how a typical VTS activity will take place. The students will discuss in small groups or as a class, and the goal is to create a collaborative and respectful exchange in which students are able to form opinions and make choices based on their individual perspectives and learn from their peers in a meaningful way. For a fun twist, we can take an image and cut it into 3 or 4 sections. Each section should include a few objects for the learner to observe and predict what the rest of the picture might consist of. In this activity, students will get into groups of 3 to 4, depending on how many sections you divided the image into. Each learner will choose one section, and they will observe their sections very closely using a chart to help them organize their observations. The chart should contain 3 things to observe. As you can see, I have listed people, things, and actions, but you might also choose something like colors, shapes, and textures. You can mold this activity to best fit your photo or picture, lesson, and students. So, next, the learners will discuss their lists and individual sections and what is happening in the picture as a whole. In the chat box, let's go ahead and try this out. What do you see in this section? Type your list in the chat box. Okay, 2 boys, 2 guys, a white car, tourists. Okay, great. And in that's a really great example because you might say, why do you think they're tourists? The guys are having fun. Great. These are all really great words. And you can see these were my words, and I think all of these showed up in the chat box, so great job. In step 3, students place their sections together to form the picture, like a puzzle. Students share the items on their list with their group members, and because each student observes a separate section of the photograph, the list will be different. Once they finish, the other group members have an opportunity to add any additional observations. In the 4th step, the teacher provides each group with a sentence. For example, after school, the boys went to the beach. The sentence can be written down on a piece of paper or told to the group orally for them to write down. The group will sit in a circle, and each student will orally contribute a sentence and then write their sentence down on the shared piece of paper. Once the story is complete and written down on a piece of paper, each group will share their picture and story with the group. Okay, our next strategy points out the importance of promoting learner autonomy, which means independence, through recognizing students as individuals with different interests and learning styles. One way to do this is by allowing students to create their own materials. Material development tasks are typically initiated and guided by the teacher, but it's important to allow students to be left alone to create and shape their own learning through brainstorming, planning, and making personal decisions. As Shin explains, children learn by doing. Therefore, young learners will benefit most from activities which are hands-on and require them to interact and manipulate realia. Student-generated materials are beneficial because they promote learner autonomy. When they are in charge of developing their own materials, learners do not rely on the teacher to make every decision. Creativity encourages learners to make connections and take risks through the processes of brainstorming, planning, and making choices. They provide an opportunity for peer learning, which enhances the value of student-to-student interaction, leading to more successful language learning. And learners are able to create and shape their learning at their own pace. So let's talk about how your students can create visuals in the classroom. But first, let's take a quick poll. Okay, so what types of materials would you ask students to create? Would you ask them to create posters, books, vocabulary cards, grammar charts, quizzes, and tests? Wow, it looks like a lot of you would ask them to create posters, which is great, and some vocabulary cards. Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the poll. Sometimes allowing students to take over and generate classroom materials can seem overwhelming. With young learners, teachers might feel tempted to guide learners entirely through an activity, but it's important to take a step back and allow learners to explore and manage their own learning and creativity. In other words, believe in your learners' creativity. Set a clear goal for each activity. Consider what you would like students to learn from the activity and form your activity around that. Also, providing your students with a clear goal provides structure and allows them to target their attention towards important information. Have students create something familiar. According to Piaget, which you might remember him, schema is a cognitive concept that helps organize and interpret new knowledge or information. As experiences happen and new information is presented, new schemas are developed and old schemas are changed or modified. In other words, targeting familiar concepts allows students to more successfully learn new concepts because they are able to take a shortcut in interpreting new information. Provide visual examples and demonstrations. Never tell when you can show. To visualize their future creations, students should first explore the content and structure of a similar type of material so that they can understand what is expected of them. Have students present or share their work. This allows for praise from peers and you, which demonstrates a supportive and safe learning environment. So that goes back to having a strong community. Creating classroom visuals is what we're going to look at today. Creating learning materials for the class to use can be a very exciting activity for young learners. When they know the class will see and use their materials, this targets and excites that ego that we discussed exists in the pre-operational and concrete operational stages. In this activity, students will be creating vocabulary posters to be hung around the room as a reference tool. To begin, we have to remember that young learners require a great deal of support, so we need to model the task and show learners exactly what we want them to do. You should create an example while eliciting from the students. For example, the word is cloud. Do you remember what this word is? How would I draw a cloud? Once you have demonstrated the task and created an example, you will want to keep this example visible for the learners to see and use as they're creating their posters. In the second step, you will decide whether you want learners to work independently or if you would like them to work together to create the poster. I like to have students work in pairs in order to increase the negotiation of language and meaningful production, but it's completely up to you and your goals. You will also want to provide them with the necessary supplies such as posters, markers. Sometimes I like to use textured materials such as cotton balls, cloth, outdoor objects like leaves. You can also take this as an activity for yourself to be creative. In the third stage, allow students sufficient time to develop their posters. You should provide support as needed, but try to give learners an opportunity to think for themselves. Remind students to write the vocabulary word in big letters so that it can be seen across the room. You can also make this activity more challenging by asking learners to use the word in a sentence and write the sentence beneath the picture. In the final stage, the students will check over their work to be sure that spelling and grammar, if you ask students to write a sentence, is correct and their images are complete. Here is one example of a student-generated vocabulary poster. As you can see, the drawing matches the vocabulary word. The student has written the vocabulary word in a visible font or a visible wording, and an appropriate example sentence using the word has been provided. Here is what your classroom might look like. Hanging the posters allows students to feel important. It also serves as an easy reference for students when they forget a word. They can simply look for the image somewhere around the room and quickly find the word that they are searching for. Raise your hands if you would have students help make materials. Wow, lots of hands are going up. That's fantastic. Great, thank you. Okay, the last strategy that we will look at today involves setting up and maintaining classroom routines. Young learners function well within a structured environment, and they enjoy consistency. Having routines in which they can easily participate makes them feel secure and confident in the classroom. Do you have any classroom routines? If yes, what types of routines do you use? Cleaning the classroom and singing with Lita from Nicaragua. I love that. That's great. Fun. Yep. Writing the dates, roll calling, attendance, warm-up, days of the week. These are all fantastic ways to use routines in the classroom. Thank you. So why use routines? Having a few basic, consistent daily routines can help build a positive and safe learning environment, building a greater sense of security and confidence within the learning community. They also encourage cooperation and shared purposes, encouraging opportunities for natural language acquisition and learner autonomy. Successful routines have a few things, such as a consistent plan that is followed each day. They're well demonstrated so that learners know what is expected of them. They involve movement or action. Examples of this might include leading the line when the class goes somewhere, moving desks for certain activities like group work or story time, or various hand and body signals, such as close your eyes and tap your nose when you know the answer to something. And lastly, they offer some type of reward. So one way to reward students might include a sticker chart, in which a chart is hung up with each of the students' names on it And each time they complete a certain classroom routine or task, they get to put a sticker next to their name. You might extend this to giving a special prize like a pencil or an eraser, maybe a piece of candy, once they fill the line next to their name. Or you can simply give them verbal praise and recognition. That's motivating for learners as well. So a few routines we'll go over. The first one is a before class begins routine. And it's just a simple routine that will calm your students down in addition to directing them towards using English. In this activity, elicit the date and weather of the day from students. You can write this on the board or have a different helper each morning who will write it for you. Students love to write on the board, so this could be a reward too. You can begin by saying, "It's time for the daily calendar. What day was yesterday?" "So, what day is today?" And give them verbal recognition. You can invite a new student each day to write this on the board as an additional reward. Once the date is written, you can elicit the weather from the students. You can ask them what the weather is like today. Call on a student to tell you the weather. Then you or a student can draw a picture of a symbol of the weather, like a cloud or a sunshine or raindrops, and so on. Okay, during class, you can create special signals throughout the lesson. So we've all heard students interrupt with "I'm done," or "I know," or "I'm confused," which can be disruptive to both the teacher and other students. So having signals in place can help maintain classroom engagement in addition to disrupting or decreasing disruptions. In the chat box, please type if you use signals in your classroom. And if you do, can you give us a couple examples of the signals that you use? Okay, claps and thumbs up. Great. Let's see. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of clapping and thumbs up. Great. 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. Wonderful. Great examples. Thank you so much for sharing with us. So I want to go over 4 examples that you might find useful. But remember, you can always use any signal in your classroom for different meanings. Okay. First, calming students down after they first arrived or gotten excited during an activity, it can sometimes be challenging. So many of you mentioned using hand signals for calming your students down, like turning off the lights. And probably because we wouldn't, One simple thing I like to do is a clap routine, where I start with a slow, spaced out clap like this. And as students realize that I'm signaling for their attention, they join in and clap to the same beat. Sometimes I like to throw in 2 quick claps or a sudden change in the beat to be sure that they are paying attention or just to capture their engagement. And usually it leads to laughter and focus. So it's a great way to regroup. I also like to use silent signals as a form of correction. I find that interrupting students during their speech can sometimes lead to their affective filter activating, which interrupts the production process. So rather than interrupting them with verbal correction all of the time, I have a few hand signals, and this reminds them of the error while encouraging them to keep up the good work. Triangle fingers is one of my favorites. I use it to remind students to form complete sentences. And it's easily demonstrated by explaining to students to put their fingers together to form a triangle. Alternatively, after students are comfortable and familiar with each other, you might ask them to perform corrective peer feedback by having them contribute hand signals throughout class. But you need to make sure and be careful about doing this. Make sure that your classroom has a strong and trusting collaborative community built around respect and trust before incorporating this type of feedback for everyday use. To encourage group participation during class without having everyone talking at the same time, I like to use thumbs up, thumbs down. When demonstrating this to the class, ask students if they agree with a statement, such as, "I like apples." Tell them that if they do, they should put their thumbs up. If they do not, they should put their thumbs down. Then practice with several statements until they have the hang of it. Let them know that when you ask them, "Do you agree?" they should remember to put their thumbs up or down. This is a simple and fast way to assess comprehension and engagement. It's important to provide students with opportunities to take ownership of their learning through making choices and expressing opinions, and this is one routine that allows for this without disrupting the class flow. And lastly, to avoid the frequent "I'm finished" interruption as a result of the short attention spans of sometimes of eager young learners, you should put a silent signal in place. I ask students to make a fist when they finish and put their hand in the air. This way, you can quickly see who is finished and give them an alternative task if necessary, along with gauging the timing of your activity. Another routine for closing the class and allowing students to exit in an organized manner, I like to use an exit ticket. An exit ticket is a short assessment given at the end of a class that students must complete before they can leave. It can be anything from typing up a 2-question quiz to asking students a question and writing it down on a note, or asking them to write down a new vocabulary word from the lesson and drawing a picture that reminds them of the word so that it stays in their memory. It's a great way to establish a classroom routine and for them to be held accountable for their learning. So, now that the webinar is coming to a close, I would like to have you do an exit ticket. What is one strategy that you would like to try from the webinar? Please type it in the chat box. The exit ticket seems to be popular. VTS is another popular one. Great, and I see some signals in there too. Wonderful, and I'm glad that you found some of these useful and that you might want to try them in your classes. Putting it all together. Young learners are spontaneous and they're eager to learn. They perform best with activities that are social, active, purposeful, and creative. They benefit from a strong classroom community where they have input. They do need visual support and teacher support. They need to interact with content in meaningful and purposeful ways. And lastly, they benefit from a structure.
Thanks so much, Lauren, for showing us some great ways to engage our young learners in the English language classroom. I think we all got some really great ideas for things that we can do with our students. And we'd also like to thank you, our audience, for your active participation today. You had some great ideas in the chat box and were very participative and participated a lot in the polls, so thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you participate also on the Ning. Our next webinar session will be on October 5th, where we will learn about